on food, being today is the day that it is, I would have said flat out, there's no way that I was going to miss this guy, and it's Tasting History with Max Miller. Yeah, better Black Friday than Black Tuesday Sosa, but considering I ate French toast today instead of any kind of turkey or anything like that because the wife wants to hold out until Saturday, I figured what better video to watch than how to eat like a medieval peasant. And it's Max Miller, guys. We know this guy. We all know this guy. We're about to learn about some history. We're about to do some food. And it's always nice to see what we don't have to eat anymore. What we absolutely don't have to eat anymore, okay? Now, I look at several things that this guy makes and I, wonder, first, I don't know if I want to eat it, or, oh boy. We're gonna see if we actually want to eat this. Holland, hey buddy. Let's get right into this. Warpugs, happy Thanksgiving. Let's get into it.
When you think of eating like a medieval peasant, you probably imagine a monotonous diet of cheap bread, stale ale, and peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot 9 days old. And
that's kind of disgusting. Very disgusting. Also, that was a perfect moment to pause. This is how one of my driver's license looked, seriously, for years.
You'd mostly be correct. But there were times, like at the Harvest Boon work, when even the lowest serf was fed beef, cheese, fine quality bread, and fish, like this dish of fish and garlic sauce from a 15th century cookbook.
Okay.
So thank you to Bombas for sponsoring this video as we learn how to feed a medieval peasant.
And see, that's something that people would be actually shocked about, G-Mage. The variety that people ate back then was so much different than we have now. Most of these days, people eat three types of meat. They either eat beef, they eat chicken, or they eat fish and pork, and that's it. 4 main types of meats. Back then, they were eating everything.
This time on
All right,
Tasting
Holland,
History.
you have a great day, bud. Yes.
Now, depending on when and where you are during the medieval period, a peasant could have varying degrees of both wealth and freedom.
Speaking of which, that's something, Dragonologist, whenever I get to do this, one of the first recipes that I've seen, and this is Tasting History's book. Look, it looks delicious, okay? One of the first things in his book is for stew of lamb from Babylon. I'm just saying. There it is right there. Stew of lamb from Babylon. I want it, okay?
But regardless, 80 to 95% of the people were still classified as someone that we would call peasants, who owed a certain amount of work to their lord. Typically, in addition to farming your own strip of land, which you rented from the lord, you would have to spend several days a week farming their strips of land.
Ah, yes! Yes! Thaddeus, look upon yine Betty. Anyhow.
But then a few times of work, there was something called a boon day, which was basically an extra day of work. It's kind of like when your manager tells you that everyone is coming in on Saturday to do inventory, but he's going to bring in pizza to make it a little bit nicer. And there was a medieval version of the pizza party. All who have come to the wheat harvest boon work shall have for dinner soup, wheaten bread, beef, and cheese.
Yay!
And for supper, bread, cheese, and their fill of ale. And the other day they shall have soup, wheaten bread, fish, and cheese, and their fill of ale.
So in other words, come to work, get crunk.
At dinner each shall have as much bread as he wishes to eat, and at supper a loaf apiece. Also, I found that quote through Jenny Draper, or Jay Draper, who is a wonderful person to follow and a wonderful person to take a tour from if you're going to London.
Hey, very
now,
nice.
It seems that at this medieval work pizza party, you would be fed your fill of cheese and ale and bread and beef and fish. And since it's been a long time since I've done a fish recipe on the channel, I decided to do a fish recipe, but I had to find one that was appropriate for a peasant, meaning it couldn't have a lot of spices, which most recipes from this period did. And that's because because most of the recipes that were written down were for the wealthy. But I did find a simple recipe for something called barbel. And this fish is perfect, because the barbel, though he be of a fine shape and looks big, yet he is not accounted the best fish to eat.
Oh, of course. It looks like a catfish with a stoner habit, you know?
And I feel that that is exactly the kind of fish that the Lord would be giving to his peasants. So this recipe, which comes from around 1450, is for barbel boiled. Take a barbel and cut him, and draw him round, and pike in the nape of the head, and seethe him in water and salt, ale and parsley.
Sweet!
And when it beginneth to boil, skim it clean, and cast the barbel thereto, and seethe him. And his sauce is garlic or verge sauce, and then serve him forth. Now, I searched high and low for barbel, but I just could not find them, at least here in the U.S. What they are is a river bottom feeding fish in the carp family.
Oh, God. Oh, God. The wife... Okay. So me and the wife were in Indiana. We were fishing, okay? We were in Indiana and we were fishing. And quite simply put, she caught like a 7-pound carp and fought this thing for 10 minutes to bring it in. Now... I was hoping it was a catfish because I was thinking, oh, that's so great. No, a carp is not a catfish, Dragon. So I was psyched when I saw her pulling in this thing, and then I saw it was a carp, and I was like, oh, God, carp. And she was like, I want to take it home and I want to cook it. Okay. We shouldn't. She insisted, so we took this carp home. Carp is hard to cook and make good, okay? Carp is very hard to cook and make good. It is a very slimy fish. It is a very hard to scale fish. It is just not a good fish. And it did not turn out well, okay? The house smelled like bad fish. Everything sucked. Oh, it was so bad. I felt so sorry for her because she was so hyped about this carp, and it was good. It was good. The fish was bad, but she learned a valuable lesson. Don't try to cook carp.
So I was able to find some fillets of carp, but even those were actually quite difficult to come by. So if you want to use catfish, I think that's probably going to be also pretty close. So.
I wouldn't say so. Catfish is, depending on the catfish. Now, the closest thing that I found to the flavor of a carp is what we call a mud cat or a brown cat.
For this recipe, what you'll need is about 1.5 pounds or 700 grams of fish, 2 teaspoons of salt, 3/4 of a cup of parsley leaves, 1 quart or 1 liter of ale. Now, you're probably not going to find the type of ale that they had during the Middle Ages. That is really something that you need to make on your own, and I will be doing that for a future video, but not today.
Nice.
Today, just find something that is low in hops, and that'll do. You'll also need about 3 quarts or 3 liters of water. So first add the ale to a pot, and then add the water and the salt, and set it on the stove to boil. Now you don't want this to be a vigorous boil, just a gentle simmer really. Then you add in the parsley leaves, and then finally the fish. And depending on how thick the fish is, or if it's a whole fish, it's going to take anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes to cook. Now ideally you would use a fish that is either whole or at least has the skin on it. I wasn't able to get that. I do think that that would at least make it hold together a little bit better because taking it out once it is cooked is a little bit difficult. It really just wants to kind of fall apart. So frankly, I think that grilling the fish or roasting the fish or pretty much any other way of cooking this fish would be preferred, and that's how we would do it today. But during the Middle Ages, they really liked to boil pretty much everything, both meat and fish and anything else. So that's how we're going to do it. And
a lot of that probably had to do with just trying to keep it from getting diseased. I'm guessing. Shellfish is very nice, Hannibal. It is nice.
As I do enjoy medieval cooking, I gotta say I'm never gonna get used to the boiled meat and the boiled fish. I'm just not really a fan.
No.
What I am a fan of is the incredibly comfy socks that I'm wearing today from today's sponsor, Bombas. Bombas has always made absolutely fantastic socks, but I do believe they have outdone them this time because there are 2 socks I want to shout out. First are the Cashmere Blend calf socks, perhaps the softest sock I have ever worn. And then there are the rag calf socks, which are just perfect for wearing while sitting with your cat and looking out at the rain.
I can honestly tell you guys, I don't wear a lot of socks. I just don't. Dude, if you send me that recipe, it'll be years before I ever try it because I seriously don't go fishing for carp, but I'll try to look it up once again.
And these will definitely be the socks that I wear to keep my feet warm when I go to Edinburgh at the end of December because it's going to be really, really cold there.
Yes,
so it's not just socks because Bombas also has t-shirts, underwear, and even some really comfy slippers.
Nice.
And whenever you purchase any item from Bombas, they donate an item to a shelter. Mostly t-shirts, socks, and underwear, which are the most requested items at shelters.
Very nice.
So feel good and do good with Bombas, knowing that your purchase will do some real good. And right now, new customers will get 20% off of their first purchase when you use my link in the description. That is bombas.com/tastinghistory and use my code tastinghistory20 at checkout.
There you go. Anybody want some socks? I'll leave it up on the screen for a couple of seconds. Get yourself some socks, Warpugs. Stop being an animal like me. Because I am an animal. I am uncivilized. Uncivilized.
And now, once you have boiled your fish, make sure to keep the liquid because we're going to need some of that for the sauce.
Ooh.
Now, the original recipe says that it will work with either a garlic sauce or a verga sauce or green sauce, which is something made with herbs, and I made that a few years back, so I'm going to go with the garlic. And luckily, I found a 15th century recipe that says take kernels of walnuts and cloves of garlic and pepper, bread, and salt, and cast all in a mortar, and grind it small, and mix it up with the same broth that the fish was sodden in, and serve it forth.
That actually sounds decent, I'm not even gonna lie.
Very simple and appropriate.
Yes, Headhunter! I missed that! I missed that too, where the stampede would happen. And then the horde would come forth, all for Tickle Me Elmo.
Appropriate for the peasantry because it only has one spice, pepper, rather than many spices, which most sauces from this time have. So for this sauce, what you'll need is 3/4 of a cup or 80 grams of walnuts, 2 cloves of garlic, crushed, a half teaspoon of pepper, 1 cup of stale breadcrumbs, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup or 235 milliliters of the boiling liquid.
Nice.
So you can crush everything up in a mortar if you like, or you can just add all of the ingredients, except for the liquid, to a blender and grind everything together.
There you
then
go.
add that to a pot along with the liquid. Now the recipe doesn't actually say that this should be cooked, and there are some uncooked sauces from this period, but very often when they include breadcrumbs, it needs to be cooked simply because the breadcrumbs are then going to act as a thickener. Also, the raw garlic is going to be very, very strong if we don't cook it, so I'm going to cook it for just about 5 minutes on very low heat, and that will let the sauce thicken up.
Yay!
And as it thickens, just a reminder that if you want a signed copy of the Tasting History Cookbook before the holidays, now is getting to be the last chance to order them, so I'll put a link in the description to where you can order those. They do ship internationally and domestically. And now, let us take a look at how to feed a medieval peasant, or rather, how the medieval peasants fed everyone else.
Yay!
So when you discuss the peasantry of medieval Europe, it's very easy to kind of
bloody peasants!
See them as a monolith. They were all poor and exactly the same, but they were not at all. They were a very diverse group. Some were very wealthy, some were very poor, and there were different levels of freedom. There were those who, while they paid rent to their lord and were obliged to work their land, were also free to move or start small businesses on the side, like brewing ale or weaving cloth, businesses that could eventually make them very wealthy. Then there were those who were typically not free to do those things,
right.
The serfs or villeins. This was typically a much larger portion of the population and were effectively tethered to the lord's land and not free to leave. Now,
yeah, serfdom was essentially slavery by another name. It was slavery with benefits. That's really all it boiled down to. You had no rights. There were no rights. Like, rights are things for other people.
What all of these people, all of the peasants, had in common was that they typically worked the land to feed not only themselves, but also everyone above them.
Right.
Be it the church, the nobility, or the royals. As the 14th century chronicler Jean Froissart put it, it is a custom in England, as in several other countries, for the nobility to have great power over the commoners, who they keep in bondage. That is to say, their tenants ought by custom to labor the Lord's land, to harvest his grain, and to make their hay, and cut their wood, and bring it home.
Yep.
So in practice, how it worked was a lord would have a manor, or very often many manors, that were a couple hundred to a few thousand acres large, and they would divide much of that up into strips of land and give those to a peasant family to work. Now, they weren't giving them to them. The peasant family had to pay rent to work that land. And usually that rent came in a portion of what was grown on the land, or sometimes in cash, or it was a mixture of both. And then also it was paid in additional labor on the land that the Lord had not rented out. So you find documents from this period that detail exactly what every single peasant owes to their lord.
Right.
In addition, it would tell you how much work a peasant had to do for their lord each year. And sometimes it wasn't very much at all, just a few days a year when the harvest came in and stuff like that. But then sometimes it was a lot of work. Like Reynold at Sol holds 1 virgate of land and must work for the first 4 days in every week throughout the year. And if any feast day shall fall on these days, it shall be allowed him as a working day. Then
Isn't that such a nice thing? Isn't that such a nice, pleasant thing?
Document goes on to specify that should it not be the time of year that the actual crops need tending to, because it was pretty seasonal, there was plenty of other work that the peasant had to do. Whether that was making fences, he had to do 32 feet a year. Hedges, 24 feet a year. He also had to muck out the stalls and make straw and all of these other things. So yes, he was working 4 days a week and had holidays off, but he was still working a lot throughout the year. And that's why you'll see this meme online that says, a medieval peasant didn't work as many days as you do. That is so not true. First of all, they worked from sunup till sundown doing backbreaking work, and that was just the work that they had to do for the Lord. They also still had to work their own land all of the rest of the time, so they didn't really get days off. And that's why when the peasants finally got a chance to free themselves from this never-ending cycle of backbreaking work for subsistence wages, they decided to do something about it.
Yep.
See, the first half of the 14th century was pretty much horrible for everyone.
This is something that people don't really have a grasp on, was how little everyone, how bad everyone had it. Like, the concept of freedom, the concept of doing things on your own volition, it really didn't, it's really a very recent, and I mean recent experience for us. Power exists where people believe it does, and they believed it back then. Because if you didn't, somebody with a sword was going to come by and pay you a visit.
The previous few centuries had been what was called the medieval warm period. And that was because Europe was uncharacteristically warm. They were even growing grapes in central England, and it made it so harvests in general were very good, which led to population growth. For instance, in England, where the records are pretty well kept, the population doubled by many accounts, if not more, between the years 1100 and 1300, from about 2 million, 2.5 million to 5 million or something like that.
The medieval warm period was also associated with a lot of the building of cathedrals and building projects during this time. If you look at a lot of the old construction, the older monasteries, cathedrals, buildings that were up, they happened during this period. And when the medieval warm period ended, oh God, did it end.
And it was because they had so much food. But around the year 1300, the continent began to slide into what is known as the Little Ice Age, which led not only to a change in growing patterns, i.e. no more grapes in England, but also just a lot more failed crops in general. From 1315 to 1317, a series of heavy rains and disease among livestock led to the Great Famine, which ravaged all of Europe, leading to an 80% decline in food production in many places.
Yippee!
Food prices rose between 100 and 300% in just a couple of years, and nobody was spared. In Bristol, the Annals of Bristol in 1315, it says, "A great famine of dearth, with such mortality that the living could scarce suffice to bury the dead. Horseflesh and dog's flesh was accounted good meat, and some eat their own children." The death toll during the Great Famine is estimated to be between 10 and 20% of the population in some places,
Yay.
which, while tragic, was merely a prelude to what was going to come. Because in 1346, the Black Death first came to Europe.
Now, the Black Death would have happened regardless, but there were so many things that happened on top of the Black Death hitting Europe. Like this shortage of food that was already happening. Immune systems were compromised. It was colder out. Things were bad.
In less than a decade, 30 to 50% of the population was dead. Some villages saw a 100% mortality rate, so that by the latter half of the century, there were no longer enough peasants alive to work the fields of the nobility. Now, the decreased population was not the only factor that led to what happened in the second half of the century, but it was a major factor because...
This is where we get last names from, by the way. This era right here is where we get last names from, like surnames. Like, if you didn't know, I'm pretty sure that's part of what happened. They're saying that the Black Death might have killed more than 50% of the population of Europe at that time. And it would not be surprising considering everything that happened.
Because with less people, those remaining people could demand more for their labor.
Well, they weren't vegan, Hannibal.
Able to leave and do that. But most people, a good portion of the population, especially in England, were serfs. And so even if the manor next door said, "Hey, I'll give you 2 shillings and a pig if you come work my fields for the week," and your lord was saying, "No, I'm going to still pay you what I was paying your grandfather 50 years ago," you had to go work for that guy. You weren't allowed to take that new job at the new price. Now, I know this is going to seem like a stretch, but just imagine living in the years after a great plague when prices have skyrocketed because of a lack of supply and a lack of labor. But you are still living off of wages that have pretty much remained stagnant for decades, so you can't afford the rent and the food anymore. Just imagine that. Well, this frustration naturally led to a series of revolts, mostly amongst the peasantry throughout Europe in the latter half of the 14th century, and the most well-documented took place in England. There, things had been exacerbated by high taxes to pay for the 100 Years' War, and there was a lack of trust in the courts and the officials of King Richard II. And finally, a poll tax was implemented. And this poll tax was 4p per person. Whether you were dirt poor, it was 4p, or fabulously wealthy, it was still 4p.
Yay!
And so that was actually the final trigger that in May of 1381 instigated an uprising amongst different classes of people from Kent led by Wat Tyler. On June 3rd,
it looks like he's about to start rapping right now. It literally looks like he's about to lay down a diss track. He even has a great name. Are you kidding me?
13th, the rebel army crossed London Bridge and entered the city, opening prisons, burning the homes of people like John of Gaunt, one of the richest men in England, and perhaps most importantly, they were there to destroy documents. All sorts of court documents, but many were the types of documents that I've been reading from today, the ones that said exactly how much a person owes to their lord and who is servile to who. They strove to burn all old records, and they butchered anyone who might know or be able to commit to memory the contents of old or new documents. It was dangerous enough to be known as a clerk, but especially dangerous if an inkpot should be found at one's elbow.
That's
Such
bad.
men scarcely or ever escaped from the hands of the rebels. On the 15th of June, Wat Tyler and the rebels met at Smithfield, outside of London, to put their demands to King Richard II, who had promised to pardon all involved. Among other things, their demands included an end to serfdom, meaning a peasant could leave the land for a better offer, a right to work other jobs, that is, a right to have a side hustle, and a right to rent land at a just price. Because
you're going to start suffering tomorrow? Why? What are you doing tomorrow that's going to have that? What are you doing that's going to really kick that off? Hannibal, yeah. Even worse was what happened to the French during the Revolution. Because I will say that Oversimplified did it so much justice because it mocked it for being what it was. It was a slap in the face to such a huge portion of the population, the way they did their taxes. It wasn't a surprise that they revolted. It wasn't a surprise the revolution happened, because any opportunity they had to actually avoid it, they spat on it.
Because the rent was just too damn high.
Rent is just too damn high!
Now at first, the king seemed amenable to this, but then one of his men insulted Wat Tyler, and Wat Tyler attacked him, allegedly attacked him, and that led to Wat Tyler getting slashed with a sword and eventually beheaded. And at that point, the king also kind of turned around and said, you know what, I'm not pardoning everyone. Everyone who was involved is going to be hunted down and executed.
Yay.
Most importantly, he didn't give in to any of their demands. Rather, he is quoted as saying, "Villains you are, and villains you shall remain."
Oh.
Villains being another word for serf. But while he did not end the practice of serfdom,
villains you are, and villains you shall remain. Ain't that a... Yeah, thanks, Dad. Like a guardsman getting promoted in the trench, an NRP server that's been dead in the water for a month now. The owner asks you want the car keys to the server. You're the most active. You don't know anything about server management? Neither do I, my bro. Neither do I, my guy. Oh, God.
In England, which had already started to die out, it did begin to accelerate the process because many serfs were just willing to take the price of possible punishment in order to find a much better job paying much better wages. In fact, serfdom officially didn't go away in England until 1574, 200 years later, when Queen Elizabeth officially ended the practice in England. And the system of peasants paying for their rent with food and work eventually just kind of evolved into the system that we have now, where we pay with money. Now, obviously, life now is very, very different than life in the Middle Ages, much better, but it is interesting to kind of see some of the parallels of just how people...
1800s, Hannibal? 1800s? 1920.
...behaved and how people worked and different practices. Like now, when your boss wants you to come in for some extra work, they will bribe you with food. That would be pizza or maybe cupcakes. In the Middle Ages, you would be bribed with cheese,
ale,
bread, meat, ale.
Get crunk at work, guys.
And something like this dish of fish.
Here
we are. A 15th century fish with garlic and walnut sauce, perfect for a medieval peasant.
It looks so good.
So first I'm going to just start with a piece of the fish. Get it off. There are bones in this, I am realizing.
Yes.
Carp. A lot of bones.
Oh, it's catfish.
Just going to taste the fish by itself. All right, I was wrong. Boiled fish is actually just fine. I guess it's sort of like poached fish. I've never had carp. It's actually quite nice. I wonder if it's farmed instead of like been eating mud. I don't know. It's actually quite good. Anyway, let me try the sauce. So I'll just dip a bit into some of the sauce. Now the sauce is rather grainy. Let me get a little bit here. You can see, especially as it cools, it starts to really thicken up. It's just from the breadcrumbs. It is rather grainy. You can strain it. They very often did. If you have like large pieces, you can strain those out. But You don't want to strain it too much to get it too thin because then you're going to lose the walnuts and everything, and I think that's going to be most of the flavor.
Yeah. Good?
That's garlicky.
Nice.
But not overpowering. I actually wish it was more walnut. I guess walnut's a pretty mild flavor in comparison with garlic. You know, so many sauces from this period are flavored with a lot of spices and vinegar. Most of them you'll actually find are vinegar-based sauces. So this is kind of unique and a nice change. I mean, I guess if you're a peasant, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
It's nothing to revolt over, but it's also nothing to write home about. Definitely gonna eat that cheese and bread though, and the ale.
There you go.
So overall, not a bad meal, nothing to write home about. I'm very glad that I'm not a medieval peasant, but it's a good dish, you know. It's hearty and would make for a good after-work meal on a boon day where you've been harvesting all day. Luckily, I'm not harvesting all day, so, you know, that's good.
Yay!
Anyway, I'll see you next time on Tasting History.
It's often, like, it's one of the things that I've always found kind of amazing in the sense that you look at how this stuff happened, you look at how all of this went down throughout the Middle Ages with the way that the climate changed and everything else like that. And you can actually see where so much happened during that medieval warm period, the culture advancements, the scientific advancements, all that kind of stuff that happened during that time period. All of that was just brought about by the medieval warm period. It was so good. And then there was a thaw, and that's when the Renaissance happened from the Little Ice Age. Just so much stuff happened during that period of time. During that period of time. Hobbit, your turkey combed? Nice, my guy. We actually have our turkey still sitting in there. It's actually de-thawing. I'm not sure what she's gonna do with it. I'm not sure what she wants to do with it. Normally she wants to do like a brine or something like that, but she hasn't said anything about that this time. So I'm kind of sitting here wondering how the turkey's gonna be. That's the big question for me. You debone it and put all the meat and dude, that sounds good. That sounds real good. That sounds absolutely fantastic, as a matter of fact. Guys, if you're catching this on YouTube, tell me how you did your turkey, because it's the day after, you know? Yeah, there was a cold period in the 1600s and 1700s that people forget about too much. Yes, exactly. People absolutely forget that there were icebergs in the Delaware River. There were icebergs in there. People forget that. It was far colder a few hundred years ago than it is now. Just be glad we live in the time that we live in, Warpugs. That is all I've got to say. You're suffering 50% overexposure and 50% aneurysm right now staring at the settings, lore, and Discord infrastructure of the server. How do you... Dude, like, it's an effort, mate. It's an effort. You just have to deal with it. But guys, the reason I like Max Miller so much, like what he does so much, is I get to learn things like this. I mostly knew. I love the documentations, though. I love the documentation he had. But this stuff I mostly knew. But the big thing for me is just learning what they ate. It's very nice. Thor's Lord. Not everybody does. Not everybody. This is just a... Like, for Americans, it's just a holiday where we get together and eat. That's pretty much what it is. Warpugs, Taste and History with Max Miller. If you're catching this on YouTube, check the links in the description down below. And this was really good.